afternoon, everyone. My name is Diana Bolander, and I'm the Assistant Director / Curator here at the Rahr-West Art Museum. I'm taking advantage of the fact that we're closed to be able to do some of these curator show and tells with you, to show you some of the objects we have in the collection that don't usually make it out on exhibit, or just to share some stories about some things. And today I thought we would talk about the doll collection. There are 209 dolls in the Rahr-West Art Museum's collection, and it gives us a really interesting opportunity to talk about why we play with dolls and why we collect dolls. I've been at the museum for about 2.5 years now. The director, Greg, has been here since 2011, and ever since then, at least, there has been a room on the second floor of the mansion dedicated to displaying dolls. This is a shot of what the room looked like in 2002 when there were more cases. Those cases have since been moved to the wood carving room, but this is what it looks like now. There's one small built-in case in the wall, and here's a close-up of that where you can see these dolls have been on display for quite a while, so it's probably about time to switch them out with some other dolls. And then we also have a dollhouse and a doll Victorian room as well on exhibit. And we do know that the room was renovated in 1998 with refinished woodwork and carpet and wallpaper. And at that time, before that, it had been used for the porcelain room. And the Formica covered cases were replaced with these wood cases in the 1990s. We don't know all the details of what it looked like exactly because we don't have perfect records, I guess. But in a note from the former curator from at least 10 years ago, there was a note that new cases for the doll collection are in the future plans. So it's kind of interesting. We do know that it gives us the opportunity to talk about why dolls. So some people might ask, why does the Rahr-West Art Museum have a collection of dolls when the majority of our collection is fine arts and furnishings? And it's just an interesting opportunity to talk about why these things matter, why it's important material culture, what makes it special. And you can talk about dolls in a lot of different ways. You can talk about dolls as toys and having social meaning, how they became used as teaching tools to strengthen nurturing skills and role playing. There's baby dolls and fashion dolls. And there's also dolls as art that are created as one-of-a-kind sculptures, and they show the interest in the human form. They're also a really good educational piece for talking about textiles, clothing, or costume. And it's interesting to see how these pieces came to the museum, who collected them, what the emotional connection was for them, and how they ended up. I think women artists tend to be underrepresented in art museums, so it's interesting to think about dolls as gendered objects, especially in our society. Their tendency to think of them as for girls and not for boys, and a lot of the doll makers that you might see represented in museum collections were women. Now the downside of that is that sometimes we don't have much information about the creators. So, but it is nice, especially when you look at statistics, art museums globally, the percentage of women artists in the collection versus men tends to be pretty low. And here at the Rahr-West, we have had a long tradition of dolls in the collection. As early as 1953, 4 dolls were given by Minnie Hoop to the collection. And in 1954, there was an exhibit of dolls from the private collection of Mrs. Guido Rahr and Susan Onley. One of the pieces that has been on display in the doll room pretty consistently since the early 1980s is the Amy Brady dollhouse. She gave this dollhouse with furniture in 1980 to the museum. And our former director, Richard Quick, had the foresight to ask her to talk about how she came upon it and how it was used in her family. So we have a little bit of information about where it came from. And she says she received the dollhouse for Christmas when she was about 10 years old, and it was around 1928. And the house was built by a neighbor, Mr. Peter Cattell, who was a carpenter and building contractor. The original curtains in the house were all lace curtains, like the ones that are still in the living room of the house. When her children played with the dollhouse, they changed out some of the curtains. Most of the furnishings came from Marshall Fields. but there was some extra things and bric-a-brac, she says, given to her by relatives. And when this piece came into the collection, it was appraised at about $700, but it's kind of interesting to look at the appraisal because the house itself was worth about $75. Most of the objects, the furnishings, were where the most of the monetary value came from. We also have this, what we call it the Milwaukee dining room, and it's a dollhouse room box. And it also came in, it was a little later, it came into the collection in 1987, and it was purchased from auction by Mrs. Ruth West for the collection. And she was very actively collecting art of all kinds for the museum. It's kind of interesting that she brought in this dollhouse. It's pretty unique. I can't think of another. I think this is the only doll piece that she gave to the museum, but it was purchased specifically for the museum and to be on exhibit. And it was done by Mrs. Marion E. Newman, and she was a resident of Milwaukee, and she was a lifelong collector of dolls and furnishings. And this room includes furniture and curtains that her mother collected too, so this room has a lot of history. And she put this together to depict an 1890s family dining room with Victorian furnishing. The bulk of our doll collection, though, comes from Elizabeth Rahr. So who is Elizabeth Rahr and how is she related to the Rahr-West Art Museum? Elizabeth Rahr was the wife of Guido Rahr. And Guido grew up in the house. He was the son of Reinhard and Clara Rahr. It gets a little confusing because there's more than one Guido in the family and more than one Elizabeth, and most of the people who call themselves Elizabeth in the family are not. That's not their actual first name, so it gets a little confusing. But she gave us 108 dolls in 1976, and in the record she asks only that they be displayed properly and actually offers her assistance in doing so. And we know that she did loan some dolls for an exhibit in 1954, like I said earlier. And in the letter that the director, who was Joseph Hutchinson at the time, sent to her, he states that these dolls represent a collection of figures representative of characteristic costume, male and female, historic personalities of many nations. And they were collected by you and Mr. Rahr as you traveled to visit many areas. So the collection, when installed in the cases that are now built, so he references these cases that have been built, to house and display, will afford a most valuable, instructive, and delightful world-ranging insight into characteristics of other lands and people. Your gift is generous, thoughtful, and in the public interest. Signed, Joseph S. Hutchinson, Director, in '76. And these 108 dolls were listed, they were appraised at about $6,000, a little over $6,000 at the time. And you can tell by the director's comment that they were really looked at as an opportunity to sort of educate on multiculturalism and show the costumes and characteristics of different people around the world. So it's kind of interesting. It's never really been researched extensively, and unfortunately we don't have a lot of comments from Elizabeth Rahr herself about each doll and why they were collected and where exactly they came from. But we do have some notes that tell us, sometimes they tell us the date, and a lot of the times we know the maker, so that's interesting. The first doll that I wanted to show you is 76-1199, and it's Emperor Franz Joseph. And I'm going to switch the view here. So I can show you. It's going to look like nothing at first, but I'm using my phone so I can give you a better view of this. It has a much better camera. So this is the doll here. And this is Emperor Franz Joseph in full dress uniform. You can see his plume has fallen off of his hat. He is, we think this doll is circa about 1930s. So he's getting a little old. He's about 90 years old now. And he has a tag here. And we know in the notes that the notable German or Austrian doll maker that was well known for making realistic dolls, made her Kathy Cruz. So we know it's pre-World War II. And she began making dolls for her children, and then was asked to show them to a department store, and it became very, very popular. And they really became associated with the movement for progressive education. And she was one of the first to work with a manufacturer to really get a lot of these going. So I'm gonna turn you here. It's hard to manage the two cameras, sorry. And the next dolls I want to show you is there's several examples of historical figures. Such as these Liberty of London dolls. And you can see them here. And Liberty of London made dolls from the 1930s through the 1960s. And they're sort of like small cloth souvenir dolls. You can see about how large that is with my hand next to it. We've got Henry VIII in full court costume. And we also have Anne Boleyn here. She's very lovely. And above, so you can see the back of them. And I know I did a little bit of research on these, and a lot of these dolls from Liberty of London were produced for coronation celebrations. And there are examples of all of his wives were done, but we only have Anne Boleyn. We don't have all 6 of his wives. But it's really interesting to look at the doll and the costume that it has on. And there's direct relation to some famous portraits of these two historical figures. So that's kind of an interesting piece to look at. We have also in this gift of dolls that that Mrs. Rahr gave us in '76. There's also a few dolls by an artist named Mary Green. And I wasn't able to find a ton of information about Mary Green, but we know that these dolls are pre-1930s. There's 2 of them here. There's a man in his nightshirt, his cap there, kind of scratching his head. And this woman is dressed up to be a figure of, this is supposed to show the gay 90s. So it's showing a historic costume from the 1890s. You can see it's quite intricate. There's even a bustle on the back. And the hat has feathers and ribbons, fake flowers. And you can see that she has combined some stitching and painting on the faces. Also in this first collection, we have some Lunchy Dolls. Here's an example of one here. There's a few of these in the collection, and it's an Italian company. This doll is circa 1933. They did molded bodies and faces, and then the wool felt dolls have heat-pressed faces and painted features. So you can see that there. And these are very much luxury good items. They were not created to be played with by children. They were created as luxury goods. And they're quite lovely, interesting use of felt. And for a doll that's so old, it's got some nice color on it still. So I apologize for the camera work there. And in this collection that Ms. Rahr gave us in '76, there's also quite a few international dolls, as I referenced in that letter from the director. I didn't pull all of these. There's, like I said, 108 of them. But here's an example of a policeman from India, an indigenous person carrying chickens from Ecuador, and that figure has real hair, a woman from Poland showing a ceremonial costume, and a farmer in China. So there's a lot of variety, and unfortunately, we don't have in the notes whether or not where all of these were purchased exactly, if they were purchased while traveling or in-house. So, but they're very interesting, and they do show different costumes from around the world. In 2004, there was another gift from the estate of the Rahrs, where 66 more dolls came into the collection. These dolls had been stored in the attic of their home on Waldo Boulevard. We also got a few photographs of Guido Rahr, when he was at the military academy, and of their home. And this portrait that I have here of his daughter, Petria, by Bradshaw Crandall. And that painting is from about 1950. I'm just going to grab another tray of dolls here to show you. And this collection, interestingly, has some dolls that are very, very small. So I'm going to show you. We don't know a lot about this piece. I'm going to pick it up and show you how small it is. It's really just about an inch or so, and it's like a little peg doll, and she even has a petticoat, if you look under her skirt there. It's also a little soldier. And you can see my finger there. That's how small these little dolls are. And I don't have any information about the maker for those pieces, but I am kind of fascinated by little tiny miniature things, so I thought those were interesting and wanted to share them. There's also examples of cultures from around the world. We have this piece here that shows Carnival Dancers, probably in Cuba. And there's lots of examples of women in different dress and of different economic backgrounds. So we have this woman here on the left. You'll see, oh, you don't see my camera here. This woman on the left here. We don't know much about her. She has a wooden body, and she's holding a basket. You can see she's wearing glasses. And this is the back of her dress here. And we also have this woman here who's probably perhaps the same age as that woman, but maybe of a different social status. She's all dressed up to the nines. She has a very fancy hat, and she's carrying a fan, and I believe she has a purse too. Where's her purse here? It's very hard to see. It's black on black. And she also has a little petticoat, and you can see she is also made of, she's made of felt here, so she's a little bit different. And her face has been painted, and it's very interesting. Just look at the detail on there. We also have some character dolls. The first example I'm going to show you is a group of dolls from Spain. And if you give me a second, I'll go grab that tray. And this is an interesting grouping. It's listed as 11 Lunchy type soft Spanish dolls made of felt, dressed in Spanish costumes from about 1940. So there's matadors and bulls. There's one of the bulls here. You'll see they have been fairly large, and they have very realistic horns and curly fluffy tails and some lances, so obviously they've been killed. And they're somewhat anatomically correct. And we also have the matadors here. And you can see how their faces have been painted. And their costumes are quite intricate. And there's another one here. See this jacket there, it's nice. We also have two dancing figures. A woman here with a fan. You can see her shawl has been embroidered. And her partner over here with the plaid pants. And the felt hat. You can see his face is also very charmingly painted. So this is a good example of dolls that she has that show different things around the world. There's also a few Christmas themed dolls. Give me a second, I'll get those. They're from the 1920s. So they're about 100 years old. It's very hard to do this camera work while putting gloves on and taking them off. So this is one small figure that we have here. And we have two of this style by the same maker. And he's got a little disc face here that's been painted. And that is attached to a felted body that also has made out of felt and a pine cone. So it's pretty remarkable and pretty delicate. And it's nice that he's still in the collection. We also have this Santa back here. The Santa on his sleigh here. And he has a very kind of devilish face. I'm sure if you can see it. I also wanted to show you two Irish spirits we have. There's an Irish leprechaun holding a shovel. And we know the maker on this. And hopefully we'll be able to research and find more information on them. The name is Noletto Wowell. And here's an Irish fairy king as well. Very musical guy. You can see his shovel there. This belt is a woven belt. So those are pretty interesting. And they show a little bit of sort of the international focus of the collection. The next couple of dolls I wanted to show you a little bit different. They're the Irish spirits. And so, like I said, Mrs. Rahr would get these as she traveled. So we have some of the dolls, like I showed the pictures of, from different places. So that red doll there, she's a cloth doll. And you can see she has a fairly simple base or inside. And she has the word Mauna Loa on her dress. So that's one of the volcanoes in Hawaii. So it might be assumed that Mrs. Rahr perhaps got this doll while she was traveling to Hawaii. And this was a tourist object that could be purchased. There are two dolls, the one you see here with the purple basket on the head, that are from Jamaica. And they're really, really beautifully made. Cloth felt dolls. They have pantaloons underneath. Their pinafore is actually pinned in, as a pinafore should be. And they've got nice earrings and some fruit on the top of her head. And we can maybe presume that this was purchased and made by a Jamaican artist and purchased while in Jamaica, but we're not really sure. We don't know for sure. There's two of these dolls from Jamaica. Here's the other one. You can see all the ruffles on the skirt and the pantaloons again. So we can maybe assume that those came from traveling, but there's also some images in the collection that are sometimes problematic because the dolls illustrate stereotypes, and we don't have a lot of research about who made the doll or where they made the doll. We know this piece was made by Mrs. Jefferson Davis Weir because it's signed on the bottom, and it's from about 1940, and the title of it is Aunt Jemima. So there's this doll here. And so a lot of us know that this portrays Black women, the mammy stereotype portrays Black women as obedient maids to white families and perpetuates deep-rooted stereotypes about African Americans. There's ties to the minstrel shows and the production of racist objects that were used for decoration and entertainment during the Jim Crow era. And these objects dehumanize Black people, and they're vestiges of slavery and segregation. So we have this object in the museum, and we know very little about it. We know that Mrs. Jefferson Davis created it. A little bit of research shows that she is from New Orleans, but there's not a ton of information out there. I do have an inquiry into another museum about her. We actually have 3 dolls by her in the collection, and the most I could find was that she exhibited at the 1939 to 40 Golden Gate International Exposition in San Francisco, and that she made similar dolls for Mrs. Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Cecil DeMille. I tried to look at some local papers in New Orleans to find out more about her, and I believe that she is a member of the United Daughters of the Confederacy. So the problem becomes a problem of representation when this is not the only image of Blacks found in the museum, but we don't have much art by diverse artists or showing diverse subject matter. So it becomes a matter of how do we display this and talk about this in a thoughtful manner that represents, that recognizes the object's history and context. And we really would like to be thoughtful about how we do that. So it's kind of an interesting, oh, thank you, Sharon. It was very interesting. It's kind of interesting to look at these dolls and think about like what we said at the beginning of the presentation about why would we collect dolls as an institution and what does that mean? So the scope of our collections is to talk about decorative and fine art from America, but also internationally, regionally, and Wisconsin. And to really talk about educational values that they hold. So it becomes interesting when you have an object that's racist of what you're going to do with it. And I think that we as a country are really reckoning with this a lot right now. You could see the Quaker Oats company took the mammy image off of their packaging this year. You can see sculptures being questioned of whether they should be out in the public, and it all is really interesting because you don't want to whitewash the history and remove things from the record, but you do want to be responsible about how you present them. So so that's what we're trying to do, and I'm sure the collections committee and the museum board, they like to have these kinds of conversations, and we talk about what makes it into the collection and what doesn't, and what stories we tell with them. So this was really interesting to share these dolls with you from the collection. I really appreciate you listening. And I'll be back in about 2 weeks. I'm going to talk about Walt Kuhn. We have 2 paintings in the collection by him, very different styles, but done in the same year. So we're going to talk about who he was and what those paintings can tell us about the history of modern art in America. And then 2 weeks after that, I'll be talking about our collection of Christmas plates, which I'm really excited about. I don't know too much about that history, so I'll be learning along with you. And I really thank you for joining us today. And hopefully we will be able to reopen shortly. And hopefully our COVID numbers will decrease in Manitowoc County, and you'll be able to come and see all these objects yourself.